Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're joining us. I'm Thejaswi. I'm a teacher and I work with school children and with largely with science, social science, math, and with libraries. And I also now work with various organizations in trying to work in education. With me today is Giridhar, Giridhar, who's one of the earliest members of the Azim Premji Foundation, is and currently the CEO, Chief Operating Officer of Azim Premji University, and he is also author of this wonderful book from which we will be talking today: Ordinary People, Extraordinary Teachers. Welcome, Giri, and it's wonderful to be talking to you about this book again, uh, which is, I think, in the times that we are living today, where uh, you know uh, the world is in crisis, and in a way we see uh, education also in crisis. Why do you think it is important that on Teachers' Day that we bring back attention to teachers who are working in the most challenging circumstances, doing, I mean, the most amazing work across the country? So, what do you think is? Why do you think this is like important for us to talk about right
Actually, it's important to talk about it all the time.
now, all the time?
So it's just that today's Teachers' Day, and I have the privilege of talking to a teacher like you, and it's important and an honor to be talking to folks today on Teachers' Day. Uh, if I may be permitted to add something which is very irrelevant but interesting, it's just that today is also Dr. Radhakrishnan's Day, which is celebrated as Teachers' Day. And it so happens that my grandfather was a student of Dr. Radhakrishnan at
Was that
presidency
right?
in Chennai. But to get back to your question, I think I was, in all seriousness, saying it's actually every day. I sometimes find it odd that we celebrate certain events and occasions as Earth Day, when actually
Mm.
it is something that we need to think of every day. But of course, we celebrate it that day, we remember it that day. Uh, but for me, since you raised that book and you started this topic, I think in some senses the book is actually a tribute to teachers.
Mm.
Uh, I've said this before on other occasions. I'll say it today again, that who wrote the book or who is the author of that book is completely incidental, and the author can be anonymous. What is important is that through the story of these teachers, I've tried to convey to people across the country that teachers across, by and large, are doing a heroic job in the country. And what more can be more important for a young country with so many children than to have teachers who are so dedicated to the cause of education?
Yeah, that's very true, Giri. I mean, I was thinking, when you said every day should be a teacher's day, in a way, for children, a teacher has such a big presence in their lives, and since you spend so much time in school between the ages of 5 or 6 till about age 14, for sure, definitely that much, and then beyond as well, that you get this constant engagement with these individuals who have a major role in kind of contributing to your life in so many different ways, in ways that you recognize, in ways that you don't, and then you realize that only many years later what that interaction means to you, and that unravels as well as you go along and become older, just like your relationship with your parents. So in a way it is a formative and important relationship. So I understand what you mean when you say it is has to be celebrated every day. But in the specific context of uh, what you've collected. Okay, let me call you the collector of stories. It can be the anonymous collector, but the stories that you've gathered in your journey, uh, you've uh, you've kind of organized those stories on uh, uh, four ideas. One idea being teachers as leaders, teachers as reflective practitioners, teachers addressing equity and quality issues, and teachers who work together as teams. Now, I know that each of these are important for a school to work and function and flourish. But I wonder if you could kind of look at one or two examples and today think of to start with maybe teacher as an individual and what keeps a teacher ticking in a given environment, and uh, in a way, because often we hear of teachers as people who have to teach the same subject over and over again, and we know that as well. I have done that. But what would you think in the stories that you've captured, that you've heard from individual teachers, what keeps them alive to the same content? How do they keep their learning and engagement alive in this? Because this is a story that we don't often get to hear as teachers from the teacher's perspective. So what have you heard when you collected these stories?
Okay. Tejasvi, permit me to just give a small preamble to that
Yeah,
before I
of
come.
course, please.
You see, I may have organized the stories of these teachers into these four sections called teacher as head teacher as a CEO, the lifelong practice, the practitioner that the good teacher is, the equity and quality in a classroom that you observe in these teachers' rooms, or the fact, as you said, that teamwork is so important. So I might have organized, but actually, if you take any of these teachers, you'll find them actually capable of sitting in any of those chapters.
Of
I
course.
used I used the writer's license and convenience to put them in four sections. So when you see that I've talked of say a dozen teachers under this subject called a lifelong learner or a reflective practitioner, actually that person could very well be in any of the other sections. In fact, there's a fifth called the heroes. Actually, all of them are heroes, but those guys put themselves out on a limb, took extraordinary risks, crazy risks. So I thought I'll put them there. So it was only a convenience of an author to bucket them, but you'll find them all over. And you are a teacher, so you would know the answer to that better. Although the way I tried to get it was to go to their schools, talk to those teachers, sit in their classrooms, talk to the community, observe them, immerse myself in the environment and atmosphere of that school and the class to be able to extract whatever I could in my own limited fashion to be able to convey through this book. But therefore, if I were to look at these teachers, why did I choose those teachers? Because clearly, among the many, many thousands and thousands of such teachers across the country, I had the opportunity to visit, say, 300 or 400 in the course of my work. And out of them, I chose, say, 40, 50 as the heroes of this book. But each of those teachers and the thousands of teachers whom I have not met are probably all under that bucket. Um, I'd like to answer this question this way, that I think any teacher who is in this book is a teacher who's been learning every day of his or her life. There are teachers I met who are in their 50s, who are just um, starting careers in their 20s. I met teachers who have been given extension by the government and are teaching actually a couple of extra years beyond retirement time. So the span of teachers I have met are people in their 20s to people in their early 60s.
Mm.
And the enthusiasm of the 60-year-old Carola sir in a small village in Uttarakhand is as much as Mahendra Singh in, let us say, a small village in Rajasthan teaching children in a small tribal community. What connects them is not merely the simple fact that they are learning every day or that they are much better teachers 10 years ago than they were 10 years ago, much better teachers today than they were yesterday. I think it's something more intrinsic, something deeper. One is, you could say, that they are listening to some inner bugle of conscience, saying, I must do what I can for these children. Many of them have quote unquote said to me, मैं नहीं करूंगा तो कौन करेगा, मैं
कौन
नहीं
करेगा?
करूंगी तो कौन करेगी. I am so responsible for these children. I see their condition. If I don't do what I can in these 3 4 years, I fear what they will be when they are 11. I fear what they will be when they are 14. And the converse of it. Oh, I am so glad I was able to do this with them because today see where they are.
Mm.
So that sense of huge sense of responsibility, not as a burden, but as an
Mm.
opportunity. They look at
Mhm.
it as an opportunity. They don't look at it as a burden, but all said and done, they look at it as a huge responsibility. So I think that this inner bugle of conscience also is some way enabled by the fact that they are working with children. If I and you were working in an office with adults, with books, or with some equipment or something else, that emotional bond between us and our work is very different from the emotional bond that you, Tejasvi, can recognize when you work every day with those 10-year-old children or
I
11-year-old
agree.
children, 9-year-old children, day after day. You come into a class, those children are unknown to you, you don't know them, and yet within a week you have formed a bond that is very unique. And then that is the bond that makes you work and do things. I wanted to spend a few minutes on that so that you can then connect to what becomes lifelong learning. So,
Yeah,
why
of
do they
course.
say, I want to know how to teach this concept better? So, teachers have told me, I attended that workshop on simple thing like force.
Hmm.
It told me how much differently I can teach science. Now, why do they want to teach science so differently? Is because they think through the teaching of science, they're probably taking the aims of education in a manner that is most appropriate. When a person says मुझे fraction पढ़ाने में बहुत दिक्कत हो रही थी, I was finding it extremely difficult to teach fractions. But then I got a magic key almost when I learned, oh, this is the way I can teach fractions. It opened doors to me. Somebody tells me, when I complimented a teacher saying, I have seen you teach place value so well, this is incredibly good. Then they are modest enough. So humility and modesty comes in. And I want to tell you about the modesty. So you're seeing me today and telling me that I'm teaching place value very well. You should have seen me 7 years ago. I was so awful at it. So the people who are really good and the people who are really learning and the people for whom this inner bugle of consciousness is ringing, you can recognize by their humility and by their naturalness, which a complete unself consciousness, which they tell you how they were many years ago, how they were last month, how they were 2 years ago. And they will themselves tell you then stories of how they botched it up, how they are doing things today. So I want you to connect with that inner bugle of conscience, the fact that they feel so responsible, that the fact they don't feel it's a burden but a responsibility, and therefore how they learn, and even as they learn, that they recognize their inadequacies, and finally the fact that 60-year-old Kairola and 25-year-old Mahinder Singh are both learning with the same fervor and enthusiasm.
That's wonderful to hear, Giri, because, and as you said, and I was looking back and thinking of all of the people that I know as well, and in myself, I could relate to so many points that you raised, and the sense of responsibility to each child that you have when you interact with them and engage with them, and you feel that every time you enter a space where the learning space with children is critical, and in the same way, uh, bringing back this aspect of your own investment, not just in the learning journeys of the children, but also in your own sense of participation and ownership of that process, and feeling that there is something that I'm doing that matters here, and that I think is a wonderful way of looking at this. So thank you for sharing that. And
If I can add one line, so in the course of this, you hear this cliche of they go the extra mile.
mm,
But that is a cliche. They don't go the extra
yeah,
mile. In Kannada, so many of them said this. ಇದು ಬರೀ ಸರ್ಕಾರಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಅಲ್ಲ.
exactly.
ये कोई सरकारी नौकरी नहीं है केवल. In the sense that because all my work, the heroes of my book are all the teachers of government schools. They use the
Right.
word sarkari kelsa. But if you remove that also, it's not mere work. It's much
That's
more than that for them.
yeah,
And it is not that all of them wanted to be teachers and became teachers.
exactly.
That is a
Exactly.
very romantic notion. No,
Yeah.
it starts as employment. They need employment. So they become teachers. Some of them wanted to be something else. One of them was a loom worker in Bombay, Bhiwandi. One of them was a taxi driver.
Exactly.
Some of them wanted to become something else. They become teachers, but once they become teachers, then they do something else. So I thought I'll add this aspect also so that we'll de-romanticize that notion that, oh, they wanted to be teachers. Nothing of the kind. Many of them probably were looking at this as their second or third option, and
Wow.
yet they're doing so much.
Yeah, exactly. So that, I think this is a good point to just pause and uh, think of, okay, uh, the fact that we have either we have romantic stories of teachers getting into it because they already had the love of teaching and love of children right from the beginning, or you have stories that you think all caricatures of teachers being like not responsible, not engaging, being somewhere else and not being part of children's lives. And you end up having these snapshot engagements that people have. And what I thought was interesting today in the last 2 years, for example, in certain contexts, not everywhere, of course, parents have had an kind of an extraordinary in into teachers' lives in and classrooms wherever there's the possibility of an online class, and which is not, of course, true of all of India because of obvious reasons of internet access and phone access and so on. But the now you hear and see a very, very different view of you start hearing of other stories of what teachers' lives are like and what they have to come with to the classroom. So, what do you think going ahead now that we have this situation in education? That we have many children who have had to face shutdowns and therefore have had to face gaps in their school engagement. And even within that, we know of many teachers who have worked with children in so many innovative ways that they can, especially in rural areas with many teachers. I'm sure if you connect to some of the teachers that you knew, you would hear of their commitment again. What do you think it looks like? Because now one of the things that you talk about in your book is looking at equity, and clearly in this situation has exposed the inequity in access even more so than before. So how do you think the heroes are responding now, and uh, you know uh, how do you think it's going to look like going forward?
Yeah, you summed up the situation very crisply in the sense that yes, these 18 months are 18 months lost in terms of learning. But not only that, they must have lost something which they had even at that time. So, as and when classes resume, not only does a fourth standard child who now will probably be in sixth standard or sixth class, the teachers have to recognize and the system has to recognize, government systems, education systems have to recognize that you got to go back. The learning losses have been so severe that it's not just as simple as picking up the pieces. You have to go back and reconstruct actually, and before you resume. So it's a humongous task ahead, and the teachers, I bet each one of them knows the humongous task in front of them. But what they'll be expecting now more than ever before is the empathy and understanding of the system. Even as we even in during normal times, which is what my book is about, since I visited and traveled in 2008, 17, 18, 19 to write the book. Uh, this is post-COVID times. If that was X was the empathy that was missing then and required then, I think X cubed would be required now in the post-pandemic resumption of schools and stuff like that. There's going to be a hell of a lot of understanding, empathy required of people. People have to recognize the reality on the ground, and when they recognize the reality on the ground, they must have the courage to then do the right thing. So it's a combination of both understanding what's the reality, and then having the courage to act on that reality. um, Equity has always been a challenge, as you know, and people talk of quality and things like that, but equity and quality go hand in hand,
Yeah.
which is why that chapter emphasizes so much about equity and quality in a classroom. Because um, as you know, among a million schools in the country, with many of them spread across our every kasbah, every village, every tanda in the country, you can imagine what a pressure there is to be able to achieve almost a utopian equity and ensure that every child has an equal chance of learning equally well. It's it's a it's a it's an unimaginably big challenge. and the teachers will need every bit of support from the system, from parents, from the community. uh, I think more than ever now they will need that.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Giri, for sharing your thoughts on this. Maybe for those of you who are, uh, um, who are joining us today, uh, Ordinary People, Extraordinary Teachers is now available in Hindi and in Kannada. So the reach now is potentially much more than what the English book could do on its own. So that's wonderful for all of us. And I would recommend all of everyone who's joined us to read this book and engage with stories of teachers who work across India and are doing a remarkable job that we often don't recognize and respect enough. And thank you, Giri, for collecting these stories together and putting them together and making it available for all of us to read. And the real heroes are the ones who are there in the book, as you say. So
Since you mentioned the translations, Hindi and Kannada, I must mention that I have my friends and colleagues in the foundation who actually took the initiative of saying that we will translate it. So I can name all of them, but just to tell you that the entire group took it upon themselves to translate, proofread, did everything. So actually,
yeah,
the Kannada and the Hindi books again are not mine at all. They are the work of those seven, eight colleagues of mine who, in record time, the book was published, let's say, in December 2019, and the
yeah,
Kannada and the Hindi versions have been published in early 2021.
2021. Yeah,
Within a period of an year, they have translated, proofread, composed everything, and the publishers also brought it out.
yeah,
So, thanks for mentioning it because it gives me an opportunity to thank those colleagues again on this forum.
yeah. So I can mention their names if you like, the
Oh,
ones that are there.
please. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, certainly.
So, so in Hindi, साधारण लोग असाधारण शिक्षक, भारत के असल नायक. This is the title, and the translation is by Lokesh Malti Prakash and edited by Gurbachan Singh. And the Kannada book,
We'll have
Sudharana
lots of
Jana
names. You must not miss out any, all the names.
Asadharana Shikshakaru. Unfortunately, here doesn't have all the names. It just says
I can tell you, and I hope
Kannada initiatives of Azim Premji University.
Manjunath, Dinesh, Periyodi, Ramakrishna, all of them, Rudresh. I can name so many of them. They all came together along with Navakarnataka, the publisher. The publisher had his own person also looking through it. So it is a complete team effort by all my
Yeah, yeah,
and team. Thank you for mentioning that because
yeah.
yes, it does. See, the book that originally came out in English, it's for the English audience, but then the heroes of my book need to read it themselves.
Yes, exactly,
That
exactly.
so the Hindi translation, the Kannada translation, the first copies have gone to these teachers.
Yeah. So that's wonderful to hear. And I know what this would do for a teacher to see that their work is being read by people whom they haven't met. It's quite something. Thank you, Giri. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. Your work with us and sharing the stories of these heroes with us more than anything else.
On
Thank you so much.
Teachers Day,
On
on
Teachers
Teachers
Day.
Day, what better privilege can I have? It was an
Yeah.
honor to do this, and the visits to these all these schools and meeting these teachers was nothing short of a pilgrimage. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Giri.